So, shabby stats in the news, whose fault is it? Now, I don't want this to be a media bashing event, but I thought I'd start it off that way. Actually, I'm not. You notice I'm not going to be particularly blaming the media for this. I would love to put, we're going to hear some positive stories later, which is great, because statisticians got a big reputation of being rather critical. However, I am going to be a bit critical, but not of the media. I have, in fact, though, got a heuristic for dealing with health stories in the news. Basically, when John Humphreys starts, scientists today say, I ask myself, if the study had come up with a negative result in the opposite direction, would I be hearing about it? Would he be talking about it? And as the answer is always no, I can just put my fingers in my ears and go la 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 when John Humphreys starts. Now this is a very cynical view, but I'd like to propose why this is the case. And basically it's because the worst evidence gets in the news. And why does it get in the news? It's because the scientists put it in the news. So that's the summary of my talk. Okay, so let's look at why living on a main road could make you fatter. So that was a recent one. Do people see this one? Traffic noise puts inches around your midriff. Yeah, actually it was quite a respectable team from Finland of occupational health. But that was the reporting. Got a lot of coverage around the world. I'm ashamed we didn't hear. I don't know if John Humphreys covered it, but anyway, why living on a main road could make you fatter. So that was the main findings from this. This was 4,000 people, 5,000 people in Sweden. They measured their cross-sectional, they measured their exposures in noise, and they looked at their, is this going to work, or am I going to click it? Oh no, let's go forward. Can I? Oh yes, yeah. And they looked at their waist circumference, waist-hip ratio, body mass index. Actually, living in noisy places made your body mass index smaller, apparently, or was associated. They didn't mention that at all. No, they just mentioned the increase in waist circumference. This was purely cross-sectional. Loads of confounders, people in noisy environments had a worse diet, etc. But they thought they'd adjusted for all of those, and so they could claim in the abstract, our results suggest that traffic noise exposure can increase the risk of central obesity. A direct causal hypothesis in the abstract. The media did not have to put that in. It was put in by the scientists. So then we see it in the press release, linked. Actually, the press release was better than the abstract. It only said linked. It didn't say, can increase the risk. Actually, but you look at it a bit more carefully. I mean, the point is, though, nobody looks at the detail, of course. The detail, if you look at the detail, it shows 0.2 centimetres, what's that, 2 millimetres in waist for every 5 decibels. Somebody worked, you'd have to be at the front of a U2 concert to be exposed to anything like something that would just vaguely be noticeable on your waist. Okay, so great coverage of that story. So what are we talking? A tiny effect. Here's another one. Chocolate accelerates weight loss. People saw that one, or have heard about this. Eating chocolate makes you thinner quicker. Lowers cholesterol, aids sleep. The Express covered that. No, the Express covered it, but not other papers. And it's just, well, they didn't really, because it was a complete hoax. This is the chocolate hoax, which came from the Institute of Diet and Health with a very respectable website and press release. Again, completely spurious, put up. Published in a real journal, the International Archives of Medicine. They paid €600 to publish it in a few weeks with no refereeing at all. Got covered. Nobody, the abstract, did not mention, the press release, great press release, doesn't mention the sample size. The abstract doesn't mention the sample size. But it was real data. They really did get people along to do this experiment, giving a control group, chocolate. And they found that was the daily weight over the days, no marking of how many days it was, of what the changing, the black line is the chocolate group, which was lower than the low carb group. So they were great about that, so they published that was the finding. Now there's no mention of the sample size in the press release, because there were 5 in each group. 5 in each group. And the non-chocolate groups, before they were weighed, they all had to drink as much water as they could. Isn't that cool? However, these were genuine weight measurements, it's genuine data, no fiddling. No fiddling. But the interesting, the paper doesn't, although it's been reported as saying that, the paper doesn't claim statistical significance in the weight loss, but they did manage to find a statistically significant result in the cholesterol change. I've checked that, it looks like it's true, even with 5 in each. You had to really, this is the only place it mentions the number of subjects. Because none of the journalists looked at the paper, or if they did, they didn't read it in any detail. And this was seen as a successful hoax. They did get a significant result because they had a huge observed difference. You have to see a big difference with only 5 subjects per per group. They described this as an exploration of p-hacking. They measured loads of things, found the one that was significant. Actually, they then reported the weight, which wasn't significant. That's the only place in the paper that sample size was mentioned. Okay, so what do we do about that? That is an example. Oh, let's not do that quite yet. That's an example of a spurious paper. However, it was genuine data, and they did it, the hoax, in order to show the sort of drivel that you could get in the media. One of the important things that hasn't been mentioned is actually how few outlets covered it. In Britain, as far as I can see, it was only the Daily Express. Everybody else must have seen it, got the press release, and ignored it. So the media, I thought, did a rather good job in this example. Rather good job. So I thought this is actually almost, and some people have said this is actually a success story for the media rather than a failure. Okay, let's look at another one. Alcohol has no health benefits after all. Clear headline in the Times. Let's see who's responsible for this. So if you look at this is based on this recent paper in the British Medical Journal, which said that in groups, apart from maybe women aged over 65, there's little to no protection present in other age sex groups. Okay, look at the data. Now, that was a curious paper because I saw that paper and I thought, oh, this is curious. There's no graphs. Why don't you put a graph in? If there's alcohol, it's not protecting you at all, or even harming you. Where's the graphs? And I'll tell you why the graphs aren't in there, I suspect. Because if you draw them, you find out that alcohol is protective at every dose and in every group, both sexes. So this is the hazard ratio. And this is a massive, this is a 40% reduction in risk, estimated here. Over 20% reduction, far greater than anyone would ever suggest alcohol could have a protective effect. But look at the size of the intervals. Look at the size of the massive uncertainty about this. The estimates are all compatible with a 10% reduction, which is the maximum anyone would ever suggest anyway, 10 to 15%. So the results in no way contradict the previous estimates of the protective effect of alcohol. However, this shows evidence against, it's claimed to show evidence against the protective effect of alcohol. Why is that? It's because their baseline group, which were people who have never drunk, was so small that all their confidence intervals were huge. Apparently, they got no power at all to detect a difference. Okay, so the conclusions are that point estimates, they show protection for all consumption levels. Wide confidence intervals include the plausible protective effects. The crucial thing is they interpret not significantly different as no effect, and that's how it was portrayed to the media. It was not the fault of the media, it was the fault of the scientists and the press release. Exaggerated and misleading conclusions. Okay, so what's my conclusion? It's the power of the press release. This is the baddie of the story. You need a good narrative. Very brilliant. Power of the press release, the baddie, and so here's my favourite press release. This is great. I just love it. This was an intensely boring paper in Nature Genetics that said that 10% of people had a genetic variant that reduced the risk of high blood pressure. No coverage at all, until a brilliant press officer got hold of it and wrote the press release which said 9 in 10 people carry a gene which increases the chance of high blood pressure. Wow! God, that's really good. Round the world headlines. Same boring old paper, but you just reframe it. Put it into a negative frame instead of a positive frame. For the wee statisticians, you just recode a 0-1 to a 1-0, and suddenly you're famous. Oh, you got to learn these tricks. You've got to learn these tricks. Okay, so what's the problem with the press release? The problem with the press release has been identified in a recent paper in the British Medical Journal, which looked at the relationship between exaggeration in media stories and the press release. It was a retrospective observational study. They're now planning a randomised trial. But they looked at these coming out of UK universities, I should add, because I don't even want to mention charities. The worst culprits of all. But so let's just look at UK universities. 40% contain exaggerated advice, 33% contain exaggerated causal claims, 36% blah, blah, blah. So essentially, huge amounts of exaggeration in the press release, and although that doesn't say there, often in the paper as well. But the scientists are equally responsible. If they're not checking what goes out in the press release, they carry equal culpability, in my idea. So, to conclude, my rather, I suppose I'm not bashing the media in this case. What I'm saying is the media are subject to a tidal wave of drivel in these press releases that comes out. So we need to acknowledge that the media are not generally responsible for shabby statistics, I don't think. Scientists, their own strong agendas, and universities, their own strong agendas, and charities, of course, are ruthless at trying to get their agendas into the news. So they are trying to get the story into the news. It means that the stories which are with the worst evidence can often get the biggest coverage because they are different, new, exciting, and of course they're of this, what I call the cats cause cancer variety, when you have a mundane exposure like noise and a bad consequence like being fat. So the current guidelines for reporting, which are there, are completely inadequate to protect against exaggeration. Completely inadequate. And I also blame editors, journal editors, for not refereeing stuff properly, getting it properly refereed, allowing this stuff through, and not only that, but then promoting it in their own journal press releases. Okay, so some small steps. What could scientists and editors do? I think some more transparent communication of risks. That means getting rid of all these measures of absolute risk, of relative risk and stuff like that, and actually putting the size of these things in there. To say something is linked with, or associated with, or increases the risk of, without saying how big an effect it is outrageous. I think that's scientific misconduct myself. In particular, you should say what it means in terms of N people. If 100 people did this, what would it mean? Would they all, if they all went, lived next to a railway line, would they all be enormously fat or not? No. Oh, just in case you're worrying, no. Stop epidemiologists giving public health advice. Doing epidemiology has nothing to do with what people should do. Epidemiologists, they can't resist at the end of their paper, and they may be doing some decent epidemiology. They can't resist at the end and this is what we should be under alcohol guidelines. No, it's not your job. Shut up. Belt up. And journal editors, don't let them say it. Stop making exaggerated claims, we've heard that as well. And for scientists to engage with responsible press releases. And of course this means statisticians. So my other final little harangue is at statisticians themselves, because it's not enough to do a nice analysis. It's not even enough to produce some nice cool graphics. You have to take more responsibility for the way in which your work is promoted to the wider world, essentially how other people will receive it and what use is made. And I think that's an integral part of the profession of being a statistician. Whew. Right, that's my little harangue. Thank you very much indeed.
Well done, David. Thank you. Three quick questions. Back.
Katie Bunce from Moorfields Eye Hospital. Are you in print with your comments about charities and where they fit within things? So I can quote it?
Oh, I think you can. They are the worst. They're terrible. But it's their job. It's their job. So I think they're the worst of evidence abusers. Not all of them. That's not fair. CRUK, for example, I think is absolutely excellent. And so it's not fair to say all charities. Let us say among the worst statistics abusers, they are a set of charities.
Second question. David, who should give public health advice?
Oh, preferably people who work in public health. And take into account the totality of evidence and the totality of impact of any advice that's given, including whether people are likely to take any notice of it.
Mike Jones, I work at Imperial College Press Office. So we're always under pressure to try and get more coverage for science in the media. Sometimes statistics are a good way of getting people's attention. How can we do it in a way that's both responsible and relevant to the public? Yeah, no, exactly. I think, so for example, that first, I think, so, of course, I'm hugely in favour of there being more stats in the media, good stats. But I think, as I said, it's doing it responsibly, and I think that you can tell good stories with statistics by talking about what would this mean to this group of people? What impact would that have on them? Apart from this, is the sort of stories that come with, or this increases the risk of. Well, what does that mean? What does that inform anybody at all? It's just, and the problem is, the next week there'll be a story saying it doesn't increase the risk of it, and it actually, I think it reduces the belief in science. So I think, you get good stories out there, and take enormous care. I think you've got a fantastic job, because the press release is so vital, because that's what attracts attention. But big responsibility comes with it.
Simon Briscoe. I used to work at the Financial Times a few years ago, and there was a constant battle as to whether we ought to run stories that had a press release, but the actual article was behind a paywall. I always felt that if the article was not in the public domain, then the story was not newsworthy. So I think that's a big problem for journalists, whether you run with it or not. And I I just wish that if something was not in the public domain, it wasn't news.
Yeah, that's quite difficult because so much of the scientific literature is behind paywalls. I mean, an increasing amount of it is open source, and of course the journalist should put a link to it on the online article, on the online version. I think that's an absolutely essential thing, that you can go and check these things. And I mean, the other thing why I want to big up journalists in long way, because the good ones really do go back to the original article, do check it, and they want to get it right, and do try to contact the scientists and talk to them, and are willing to take in quotes from people who don't like it very much, maybe obtained to the Science Media Centre. So I in no way want to be haranguing science journalists on the whole at all.
Margaret Eames from Imperial College and the Acorns Public Health Research Unit. I'd like to suggest that scientists should write their press releases, and perhaps the RSS could do a workshop for scientists writing their own press releases, and the journalists should criticise it and have a discussion about it.
Yeah, I would love to see, we're talking again about making statistics attractive. The whole idea of data journalism is so important now that statisticians need to have, or some have a training in narrative construction, actually telling stories. We can hear more of that in a minute, I think. Telling stories with their numbers that are good and vivid, but also reliable. What are called quality-controlled stories is what you need to be able to do. So they are actually trustworthy, but they do have all the features of an attractive narrative.
David, thank you very much.
Thank you.